joining us tonight by way of Facebook or YouTube, and hope this study tonight in the book of Nehemiah encourages you. That's where we are. And this book has a whole lot of really good, simple, easy, practical lessons for us. Some really inspiring truths that are revealed. Great examples of people's faith and faithfulness and humility and selfless service for the benefit of others. Just a really, really good book. I hope you enjoyed it. By way of announcement for next week, we're going to have to just give a really cursory handling of the book of Esther, leaving that for your study, and then get into the book of Job. So next week it won't be much on Esther, and then we'll deal primarily with the book of Job because it's big and demands our attention. And so if I'm choosing, I'm thinking Esther can best be left for our own reading and appreciation and dealing more with Job. So you may or may not share that opinion, but that's mine as a teacher. So that's how it's going to be unless somebody else teaches next week. Okay, we're in the book of Nehemiah tonight, and we're still in that section of the history of God's people where they have been a nation, became a divided nation, both of the nations, Judah and Israel, being unfaithful to their covenant with God. And as a result of that, both of them taken into captivity. Israel into Assyria, Judah into Babylon. So they spent 70 years there. And do you remember from last week and previous discussions which prophet it was that had told Judah that they would be in Babylon for 70 years? You might remember that prophet. Take a stab. It's a big one. So, what'd you say, Drew? The prophet that told Judah they would be in captivity in Babylon for 70 years. Who was that prophet? No, it was Jeremiah is the prophet. So he says that they will be there. So settle down, settle in. You're going to be here a while. Now they've come back, and there are 3 phases to their return from captivity. The first one was recorded for us in the book of Ezra. It happened under those 2 leaders, Joshua and Zerubbabel. Some 42,000 Jewish people come back from Babylon back to Jerusalem, Judah, to resettle and to rebuild the temple of God. And last week we noted that, how they started that work of rebuilding God's temple, laid its foundation, had trouble both inside and outside, that delayed that work for about 16 years until they finally finished it. So first phase was under Ezra. Under Joshua and Zerubbabel. Second phase happened about 50 years later under the scribe and priest Ezra. Now tonight we get the third phase. And it doesn't record a large number of people going back, but it just records Nehemiah's work. And he's contemporary with Ezra, going back to rebuild the city walls around Jerusalem. So we're going to discuss that tonight, the book of Nehemiah. Before we do, I would just be real interested in your observations and your takeaways as you read the book of Nehemiah. It's easy. It's 13 chapters. They're not long. It's a narrative. There's not really deep, mysterious things recorded there. What were your takeaways when you read the book of Nehemiah? What did you come away with? Anybody?
Nehemiah was determined to do good. Seems like everybody did it for a little while, and then the foreign things kept creeping back in. But he seemed determined that that was not going to happen.
Yeah, he was a very determined person. Absolutely. So you take away some of the character of Nehemiah himself, the person. Anybody else? Things that you just said, I didn't know that was in there, kind of thing. Or I knew it, but now I appreciate it more deeply. Anything else?
One of the things that I came away with, and this is kind of a silly little thing in a way, but, you know, when, we have a situation here where there's a water gate here, as there was a water gate with, one of our presidents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was rather interesting, you know, here's two different times frames from, you know, going on basically between them, but yet there's a water gate in both, and this water gate was similar to what, you know, what they were doing too.
Some controversy at both of them, wasn't it, Paul? And conspiracy and cover up and other. That's interesting. Yeah. Anybody else? Just on your reading of the book of Nehemiah. Drew?
I would say it's encouraging to me on a number of levels, especially in the mid part of the book. And then toward the very end of the book, I don't remember it ending quite like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it always did. I don't think I paid attention to it. It's just kind of open-ended.
Yep.
There's not a great deal of resolution there, and you're kind of left wondering, okay, well, now what?
What's the rest of this story?
Yeah.
How do all of these things
Yes.
end up? Yeah, I agree with that. Anything else? Anybody? Just on your initial observations about the book of Nehemiah that you'd like to add?
One of the things that kind of stuck out to me was all of the people that was named in here and all of the, and the camps, like the census, how that they had them. You know, there was so many people from this tribe here, so many from this tribe here, listed right on down the line. But,
Mhm.
you know, what's the significance of us knowing all of those facts, I guess is what I'm getting at right there.
Mhm.
To me, when I see those things, I just kind of scan over them and just go right on, because I don't see the significance of it.
I'm wondering if, the answer to that, part of that might be, you asked about God's plan. God did have a plan all along, and, you know, when you said, you asked about putting in his mind and in his heart,
Mm-hmm.
God had a plan, but Nehemiah was, a very pragmatic, well-organized man. He planned for everything, and he knew that he was gonna need those nobles and all the ones specifically that helped with getting, the more they were involved, the more committed they would have been to not only, doing the will of God, but making sure that the temple got restored.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he carefully counted with that census, all those people, and the nobles then represented each of that set of people, during that time. I don't know, 300,000 of them or something like that, but
Mm.
total, but, he needed them and he knew he did. And, I also noticed, you know, and I may be calling that, may not be, but, God had a plan, and I think that was probably in there. He wanted to, he knew he needed, he would need those nobles, the ones that were faithful, representing certain families to help with building the temple.
Mm-hmm.
So he clearly delineated who they were and, identified them. And they worked on it, of course, before, that, worked on it over in chapter 4. And I think, the census was not taken until chapter 8 and 9, but, maybe 8, but, they're the ones that helped him. And he was, you know, had the details that he had when they were working on the wall. He even had an emergency backup plan. Every man worked with construction materials with one hand, and he had a weapon in the other hand.
Mm-hmm.
And he had beside him a trumpet. And he said, if you hear this trumpet blowing, you come back to us, because, you know, we're in trouble and we need help.
Mm-hmm.
He prepared for a lot of different, things, contingencies, but, and he had to deal with several things. You know, the conspiracy against him with those three kings, they were very jealous of him, they mocked him. They could have made it really miserable for him to be there, but since he brought with him the letters from King Artaxerxes, and that was his passageway after he got across the river, across the Jordan into Judah. He would show that to them, and then they would have to respect that because he was the king of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
And so he planned that. Of course, that was, I believe, God's plan too.
Absolutely. That's good. Good summary. Thank you. John?
I was gonna say it was very well organized because each, I guess, tribe or family did their own section.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so organized. And it didn't take, as we would say, oh, how many years did that take? They did it in weeks, wasn't it?
52 days.
52 days?
Mhm.
Okay.
50. And so we're alluding to it. So what is the big event in the book of Nehemiah? What is the big event? Rebuilding the walls around what city? Around Jerusalem. And doing that in 52 days. Amid all of this opposition, and then all of the different people contributing to that project of rebuilding. But that only takes us up through chapter 6, the rebuilding of the walls. So what's the second half of the book about? It's not a retelling of that same story about the rebuilding of the walls. It deals more with things like what? Like Ezra reading the law of God for, seemed like 6 hours, from early morning till midday, doing it for 7 days. And the people gathering for prayer and confession and worship and coming up with this document that all of them seem to sign, saying, God, we're going to be faithful to you. So if the first part is about rebuilding the walls, what's the second part? Rebuilding a relationship between God and his people, rebuilding the community, rebuilding and renewing the spiritual life of this people. The walls are important, but they really could do without the walls, but they can't do without this. So we learn about both of those things, and the higher lesson being the rebuilding of this vital, personal, thriving relationship with God. And so, as you read the book, you're going to see both of those things. And then there is this emphasis. I ask you to pay attention to how many prayers, and in particular, how many prayers of Nehemiah do you notice as you read this book? Did anybody keep track of that? Just the number of times Nehemiah was praying.
One of them was almost the entire chapter, chapter 9.
In chapter 9, we're not even sure if this is his prayer or someone else's offering it. It looks more like a collective national prayer, doesn't it? I'm sure he's vital to it. But then we have, in addition to that, I think that is the longest prayer recorded in Scripture for us, is that one. Unless you take something else and see a psalm as a prayer, but in terms of just something that strictly was said to be a prayer, this is the longest prayer that we have recorded for us.
And it's history. It gives the history
Yeah.
of Israel and how
Mm-hmm.
they disobeyed and God forgave them and brought them back. They disobeyed again, God brought them back. Captivity happened and all that, and it's just got everything.
Since Laura's not here to share this with you guys, I'll share it with you that after her reading of Nehemiah, and especially chapter 9 where that prayer is, and